Marcus Rivera pulled his jacket tighter against the October chill. As he made his rounds through Blackwood Manor, the old Victorian mansion, converted into high-end apartments 3 years ago, still retained its mysterious atmosphere despite the modern renovations. As the night security guard, Marcus had grown accustomed to the building's creaks and groans, but lately, something had been different. The scratching sounds started a week ago, always around midnight, always coming from the basement storage area. At first, he'd assumed it was mice or maybe settling pipes, but the noise was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It sounded almost like someone tapping Morse code against the walls. Marcus descended the narrow staircase to the basement, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. The storage area was cramped, filled with boxes of tenant belongings and building maintenance supplies. He'd checked here multiple times over the past week, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the scratching was louder. He followed the sound to the far corner, where an old wooden panel covered what he'd always assumed was just another section of foundation wall. The scratching was definitely coming from behind it. Marcus ran his fingers along the panel's edges, noticing for the first time that it wasn't actually attached to the wall. It was a cleverly disguised door. His heart pounded as he worked his fingers into a small gap and pulled. The panel swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. The scratching stopped immediately, replaced by the sound of rapid, panicked breathing. "Hello?" Marcus called softly, shining his flashlight into the passage. "Is someone there?" A woman's voice responded from the darkness, barely above a whisper. "Please don't call the police." Marcus's training told him to step back, to call for backup, but something in her voice, fear mixed with exhaustion, made him pause. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said carefully. "Can you come out so I can see you?" There was a long silence before a figure emerged from the shadows. She was probably in her late 20s, with long dark hair that looked like it hadn't been properly washed in days. Her clothes were wrinkled and dusty, and her large brown eyes held a mixture of defiance and desperation that made Marcus's chest tighten. "My name is Elena," she said, stepping fully into the storage room. "I know this looks bad, but I can explain." Marcus lowered his flashlight, not wanting to blind her. "How long have you been living back there?" 3 months, she admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. "Ever since they started renovating the main building. I've been very careful not to disturb anyone." 3 months, Marcus couldn't hide his amazement. "How is that even possible?" "I do security sweeps every night." Elena almost smiled at that. "The passages run throughout the entire building. There are entrances on every floor, but they're all hidden. This building has secrets most people never discover." Marcus studied her face in the dim light. She didn't look like a typical vagrant or squatter. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was an intelligence in her eyes and a careful way she spoke that suggested education and refinement. "Are you in trouble, running from someone, in a way?" she said, glancing back toward the hidden passage. "But it's complicated, very complicated." "Try me," Marcus said, surprising himself with how much he wanted to understand her situation rather than simply report it. Elena hesitated, clearly weighing her options. "If I tell you, you'll think I'm crazy or criminal." "Probably both." "I found a woman living in secret passages in a Victorian manor," Marcus said with a slight smile. "My definition of crazy has been pretty flexible lately." Something in his tone seemed to reassure her. "I'm protecting something that belongs to my family, but other people want to take it away. Important people with lawyers and connections. I can't fight openly." "What kind of something?" Elena looked toward the passage again, then back at Marcus. "Art. Paintings that my grandfather hid during the war. The people who claim ownership now, they're not the rightful owners." Marcus felt his skepticism rising. Art theft was serious business, and her story sounded like something out of a movie. But looking at her face, seeing the way her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, he found himself wanting to believe her. "Show me," he said suddenly. Elena's eyes widened. "What?" "Show me these paintings. If they're what you say they are, maybe I can help you figure out a legal way to handle this." "You do that? You don't even know me." Marcus wasn't sure what had come over him. His job was to secure the building, not get involved in tenant disputes or art theft cases. But something about Elena drew him in, her courage in defending what she believed was right. The way she'd survived on her own for months without hurting anyone. The vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. "Maybe it's the romantic in me," he said, "but I've always been a sucker for someone fighting impossible odds." Elena stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw the exact instant she decided to trust him. "Follow me," she said, turning back toward the hidden passage. "But be prepared, once you see what's back there, you'll be involved whether you want to be or not." As Marcus followed Elena into the narrow, hidden corridor, he realized his quiet life as a night security guard was about to become much more complicated. The scratching sounds that had driven him to investigate had led him not to rats or settling pipes, but to a mystery that would challenge everything he thought he knew about right and wrong, and possibly to the most important person he'd ever meet. The passage stretched ahead of them, lit only by his flashlight beam, holding secrets that had been hidden for decades. Behind them, the storage room returned to silence, but Marcus knew there would be no going back to his simple, predictable routine. Some discoveries, he was beginning to realize, changed everything. Elena led Marcus through a maze of narrow passages that seemed to wind throughout the entire building. The corridors were cramped but well-maintained, with smooth wooden floors and walls that had been carefully preserved. Small ventilation grates provided air circulation, and Marcus noticed electrical outlets had been discreetly installed at regular intervals. "My grandfather was incredibly thorough," Elena explained as they walked, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. "He designed these passages in 1943 when he feared the Nazis might confiscate his art collection. The renovation company 3 years ago had no idea these existed. The original blueprints were deliberately incomplete. They emerged into a larger chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The room was perhaps 20 feet square, with proper lighting and climate control. But what dominated the space were the paintings covering every wall. Dozens of them, ranging from small portraits to large landscapes, all clearly very old and very valuable. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, slowly turning to take in the collection. Even with his limited knowledge of art, he could see these weren't reproductions. The brushstrokes, the way the paint had aged, the ornate frames, everything spoke of authentic, historical pieces. Elena moved to one particular painting, a stunning portrait of a young woman in Renaissance dress. "This is Lady in Blue by Francesco Melzi, a student of Leonardo da Vinci. It was stolen from my family's gallery in Florence in 1944. My grandfather managed to recover it and several others after the war, but by then, our family had lost everything: our home, our business, our reputation." Marcus stepped closer to examine the painting. "It's incredible. But Elena, if these were stolen, even if they originally belonged to your family, that's the problem," she said, sinking onto a wooden crate that served as a chair. "Officially, these paintings don't exist anymore. They were reported destroyed during bombing raids in Florence. The insurance companies paid out. The case was closed, everyone moved on. But my grandfather spent years tracking them down, buying them back from private collectors and black market dealers." She gestured toward another wall. "When he died 5 years ago, he left me a letter explaining everything. He'd been living here since 1952, keeping the collection safe, waiting for the right time to restore our family's name. But before he could act, he had a heart attack." Marcus felt a growing understanding of Elena's situation. "So legally, you can't prove ownership because officially these paintings no longer exist. But you can't sell them or donate them without raising questions about where they came from." "Exactly. And now there are people who've discovered the collection exists. They claim to represent the rightful heirs of some of the original victims. But I've done my research. They're treasure hunters with forged documents, trying to profit from stolen art." Elena moved to a desk in the corner where papers were scattered: legal documents, historical records, and what looked like detective work. "They've been pressuring the current building owners to give them access for a historical survey. They know the art is here somewhere, but they haven't found the passages yet." Marcus picked up one of the documents, a letter from a law firm demanding access to conduct searches for historically significant artifacts. The letterhead was impressive. but something about the language seemed off. Have you tried going to the authorities yourself? The FBI has an art crime unit. With what proof? I'm technically squatting in a building I don't own, protecting art that officially doesn't exist, based on a dead man's letter. Even if I could prove my grandfather's story, I'd probably be arrested for possession of stolen property. The weight of her situation settled over Marcus. Elena wasn't just hiding from treasure hunters, she was trapped in an impossible legal position, trying to protect her family's legacy while living like a fugitive. How have you survived here for 3 months? He asked, noticing makeshift sleeping arrangements in one corner and boxes of non-perishable food. Elena almost smiled. The passages connect to several apartments. I've been very careful, only taking what I need when tenants are away. I know everyone's schedules, their habits. I've become something of a ghost in my own family's home. That's incredibly dangerous. What if someone had caught you? Someone did, she said, looking directly at him. You. Marcus felt heat rise to his face. I meant someone else. Someone who might not listen to your story. I know. I've been living on borrowed time, but I couldn't leave. This collection represents everything my family lost: our heritage, our honor, our future. My grandfather sacrificed his entire life to preserve it. Marcus walked slowly around the room, studying the paintings with new eyes. Each one represented not just artistic value, but a family's struggle against impossible odds. There has to be a way to legitimize this legally. Art restitution cases happen all the time now. Not when you're a broke graduate student with no connections and no proof of purchase. Elena said bitterly, I was working on my master's degree in art history when my grandfather died. I used my savings to research the collection's history, but I ran out of money months ago. What's your degree in specifically? Renaissance art authentication. Ironic, isn't it? I can prove these paintings are authentic, but I can't prove they're rightfully mine. Marcus stopped in front of a small landscape that seemed to glow in the artificial light. Wait, you can authenticate these pieces. That's exactly what we need. If you can prove they're real and document their provenance, that gives us leverage. Us? Elena asked, hope flickering in her voice. Marcus realized what he'd said and felt a moment of vertigo. He was talking about getting involved in what could be a major art theft case. His job, his quiet life, his careful routine, all of it was about to disappear. But looking at Elena, seeing the courage it had taken for her to trust him with her secret, he couldn't bring himself to care about the consequences. Yes, us, he said firmly. You can't fight this alone anymore. And I can't walk away knowing what I know now. Elena stood up, crossing to where he stood. She was shorter than he'd realized, and up close he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also the determination that had kept her going for months. Why? She asked softly. Why would you risk everything for someone you just met? Marcus thought about that. The rational answer was that he believed in justice, that he couldn't stand by while criminals tried to steal from someone who'd already lost everything. But looking into Elena's eyes, he knew the truth was more complicated, because some things are worth fighting for, he said, and some people are worth protecting. Elena stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume beneath the dust and staleness of months in hiding. Marcus, if we do this together, there's no going back. These people are dangerous, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Then we'll have to make sure they don't get it, Marcus replied, surprised by his own conviction. Elena searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, partners. As she extended her hand to shake his, Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling over him. He was no longer just a security guard who'd stumbled onto a mystery. He was now Elena's ally in a fight that would test everything he believed about courage and justice. And despite the danger ahead, he'd never felt more certain of anything in his life. Elena led Marcus to another section of the hidden chamber, where an old wooden desk sat covered with yellowed documents and faded photographs. She pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, and opened it carefully to reveal her grandfather's handwriting in faded blue ink. Vincent Blackwood wasn't just an art collector, Elena began, her voice taking on the reverent tone of someone sharing a sacred story. He was a resistance fighter who used his wealth and connections to save art from the Nazis. This journal Documents everything, every piece he rescued, every life he saved, every risk he took. Marcus leaned closer as Elena turned the pages, revealing detailed sketches of paintings, maps of hidden locations, and lists of names written in multiple languages. The journal read like a thriller novel, but the careful documentation then faded. Photographs proved it was all true. Vincent inherited this manner from his father in 1938. Elena continued. He was only 26, but he'd already spent years traveling through Europe, building relationships with artists and collectors when the war started. He saw what was happening to Jewish families and their collections. She pointed to a photograph of a handsome young man standing next to the very portrait that now hung on the chamber wall. He started small, buying pieces from families who needed money to escape, storing them here for safekeeping. But as the war progressed, he became more involved with the underground networks. Marcus studied the photograph. Vincent Blackwood had Elena's eyes, intelligent and determined, with a hint of defiance. How did he get the art out of Europe? Through his shipping business. The Blackwood family owned a small fleet of merchant vessels that ran supplies between England and neutral ports. Vincent used them to smuggle both art and people. Elena turned to a page covered with ship manifests and coded entries. He saved over 300 pieces of art and helped 47 families escape Europe. That's incredible. He was a hero. Elena's expression darkened. That's what I always thought too. But after the war, everything changed. The families he'd helped were scattered across the world, many of them starting new lives with new identities. The art he'd saved was technically stolen property, even though he'd rescued it from thieves. She pulled out a bundle of legal documents from the 1950s. Vincent tried to do the right thing. He contacted authorities, attempted to return pieces to their original owners or their heirs. But the legal system was chaos. People were dead. Families were missing. Governments were rebuilding. Many pieces couldn't be traced back to their rightful owners. Marcus read over one of the documents, a letter from the British Museum declining to accept several paintings because their provenance couldn't be properly established. So he was stuck with a collection he couldn't legally possess but couldn't morally abandon. Exactly. And then the treasure hunters started appearing. Elena's voice turned bitter. People who'd heard rumors about his wartime activities, who knew he had access to valuable art. They didn't care about returning pieces to families or preserving history. They just wanted to profit. She showed him newspaper clippings from the 1960s and 70s, articles about mysterious break-ins at the manor, legal challenges to Vincent's ownership of various pieces, and accusations that he was a war profiteer rather than a hero. The stress destroyed him, Elena said quietly. He became a recluse, spent his fortune fighting legal battles, lost most of his friends. By the time I was born, he was already an old man living alone in this huge house, protecting a collection that had cost him everything. Marcus felt a growing understanding of the tragedy that had shaped Elena's family. When did you first learn about all this? I always knew something was different about grandfather Vincent. He lived simply despite the valuable art everywhere, never sold anything, never talked about his past. My parents thought he was just eccentric. Elena's voice softened with memory. But he and I had a special connection. I was the only one who showed real interest in the art, in the stories behind each piece. She pulled out a photograph of herself as a child, standing next to Vincent in front of one of the paintings. The old man's face was lined with age and worry, but his eyes sparkled as he looked down at young Elena. He started teaching me about authentication when I was 12, how to spot forgeries, how to research provenance, how to understand an artist's techniques. At the time, I thought he was just sharing his hobby. I didn't realize he was training me to be the collection's next guardian. Marcus studied the photograph, seeing the clear affection between grandfather and granddaughter. He never told you the full story while he was alive, not until the very end, 3 days before he died. He gave me this journal and a key to the hidden passages. He told me the basic facts, but he was too weak to explain everything. I've spent the last 5 years piecing together the complete story from his records. Elena closed the journal and looked around the chamber with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Every painting here has a story, a family that was saved, a culture that was preserved, a piece of history that almost vanished forever. Vincent spent 60 years protecting these stories, and now that responsibility falls to me. But you're not alone anymore, Marcus said, placing his hand over hers. We'll find a way to honor his legacy properly. Elena looked at their joined hands, and Marcus felt something shift between them. The attraction he'd felt since discovering her was deepening into something more substantial. Respect for her courage, admiration for her dedication, and a growing certainty that their meeting was more than coincidence. There's something else, Elena said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Something Vincent discovered near the end of his life that changes everything. She pulled out a manila folder that had been carefully preserved in plastic. Inside were photographs and documents that looked much more recent than the wartime materials. 2 years before he died, Vincent received a visit from a man claiming to represent the heirs of one of the families he'd helped during the war. The man had documentation that looked legitimate, spoke knowledgeably about pieces in the collection, and seemed genuinely interested in recovering his family's heritage. Marcus felt a chill of premonition. Let me guess, it was a setup. Worse than that, Vincent became suspicious and did some investigating. The man was part of an organized network that specifically targets art collections like this one. They research wartime art movements, identify pieces that are in legal limbo, then create false heir claims to acquire them legally. She spread out photographs of documents that had clearly been taken in secret forged family trees, fabricated death certificates, falsified legal papers. They're not just treasure hunters, Marcus. They're sophisticated criminals who exploit the chaos of wartime history to steal art that's already been stolen once. And these are the people who are trying to gain access to the building now. Elena nodded grimly. Vincent spent his last 2 years gathering evidence against them, but he died before he could act on it. That evidence is in these files, proof that their claims are fraudulent, documentation of their methods, even evidence of other collections they've targeted. Marcus felt the full weight of their situation settling over him. They weren't just protecting Elena's inheritance. They were potentially exposing a major art fraud operation that had been targeting families and institutions for decades. Elena, he said slowly, this evidence could bring down an entire criminal network, but it also makes you incredibly dangerous to them. I know, she said, meeting his eyes with quiet determination. That's why I've been hiding. I'm not just protecting the art, I'm protecting the evidence that could finally give Vincent the justice he never got. As Marcus looked around the chamber filled with rescued art and carefully preserved evidence, he realized that Elena's grandfather had left her more than just a collection to guard. He'd left her the tools to finish a fight that had been going on for 70 years. And now Marcus was part of that fight, whether he was ready or not. Marcus woke to the sound of Elena shaking his shoulder urgently. He'd fallen asleep in the hidden chamber after spending hours reviewing Vincent's evidence files, and the artificial lighting made it impossible to tell what time it was. Here, Elena whispered, her face pale with fear. 3 men in suits. They convinced the building manager to let them conduct their historical survey starting this morning. Marcus checked his watch. 6:30 a.m. His shift had ended an hour ago, which meant the day security guard had already arrived. How do you know? Elena pointed to a small monitor mounted on the wall that Marcus hadn't noticed before. Vincent installed a basic surveillance system for the main entrances. I've been watching them since they arrived at 6. On the grainy black and white screen, Marcus could see 3 men in the building's lobby. One was tall and thin with silver hair, clearly the leader. The other 2 were younger, broader, with the alert posture of hired muscle disguised as assistants. The tall one is Richardson, Elena said, her voice tight with controlled fear. He's the one who approached my grandfather 2 years ago. The others must be new. Vincent's files only mentioned Richardson and one partner. Marcus studied the screen as the men spoke with the building manager, who was nodding enthusiastically and gesturing toward the elevator. They're coming up. We need to move this evidence somewhere safe. Where? They're going to search every common area, and if they find the passage entrances. Elena's voice trailed off as the implications hit them both. Marcus thought quickly. The men would start with the basement storage area. It was the most logical place to hide valuable items. but they wouldn't expect anyone to be actively working against them from inside the building. "Pack the most important documents," he said, grabbing a duffel bag from Elena's supplies. "We're leaving, but we're not running. It's time to take this fight to them." Elena looked confused, but began stuffing crucial files into the bag. "What do you mean?" Vincent spent years gathering evidence, but never had the right connections to use it. "You've been hiding alone, trying to protect everything by yourself. But now we have an advantage they don't know about. I'm supposed to be here." Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized, but never expected to use. "Detective Park, this is Marcus Rivera, night security at Blackwood Manor. I need to report suspicious activity." "Yes, I can wait." "What are you doing?" Elena hissed. "James Park is a detective I met last year during a break-in investigation at another building I worked. He specializes in art crimes. If we're going to expose this network, we need someone in law enforcement who understands the complexities." Detective Park's voice came through the phone with professional attention. "Mr. Rivera, what kind of suspicious activity?" "Three men claiming to be conducting a historical survey, but they're asking questions about specific artwork and hidden storage areas. Given the building's history, I thought you should know. They have legal documents, but something feels off." There was a pause. "Blackwood Manor, I know that address. We've had inquiries about potential art theft issues there. Stay where you are, I'm 20 minutes out." Marcus hung up and looked at Elena, who was staring at him with a mixture of admiration and terror. "You just invited the police to a building where I'm illegally squatting with a collection of questionable artwork." "Trust me," Marcus said, surprising himself with how calm he felt. "Park is one of the good guys. When he gets here, we're going to tell him everything: Vincent's story, your situation, the evidence against Richardson's network. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." Elena shouldered the bag of documents. "There's another exit from the passages. It comes out in the alley behind the building." "But Marcus, if you're caught helping me, then we're caught together," he said firmly. "I'm not abandoning you now." They moved quickly through the narrow passages, Elena leading them through turns and junctions that Marcus couldn't have navigated alone. Behind them, they could hear muffled voices as Richardson's team began their search of the building. "They're being very thorough," Elena whispered as they paused at a junction. Through the thin walls, they could hear furniture being moved and doors opening and closing systematically. "They know what they're looking for," Marcus replied, "which means Vincent was right about them being professionals." They reached the alley exit just as Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Park. "Arrived at building. Where can I find you?" Marcus texted back. "Basement storage area. The men you're looking for are already here." Elena looked at him with concern. "You're really going back in there?" "I have to. Park needs someone who can explain the situation, and you need to stay hidden until we know it's safe." Marcus took her face in his hands, struck by how natural the intimate gesture felt despite having known her for less than 24 hours. "Elena, I need you to promise me something. If this goes badly, if Richardson's people find you, or if the police don't believe our story, take that evidence and disappear. Find another way to expose them. I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. "You might have to. Vincent's work is bigger than just the collection. It's about stopping these criminals from victimizing other families. That evidence is the only way to do it." Elena stared at him for a long moment, then pulled him down for a kiss that was desperate and fierce and full of unspoken promises. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Come back to me," she whispered. "I will," Marcus promised, hoping. He was right. Marcus made his way back through the passages to the basement storage area, arriving just as Detective Park descended the stairs with two uniformed officers. The detective was a compact Asian man in his 40s with sharp eyes and an alert posture that suggested he missed very little. "Mr. Rivera," Park said, extending his hand. "You said 3 men with questionable documents. They're in the building somewhere, claiming to represent heirs of wartime art victims. But I have reason to believe they're actually part of a fraud network that targets collections in legal limbo." Park's eyebrows rose. "That's very specific. What kind of reason?" Before Marcus could answer, voices echoed down the stairwell. Richardson's team was heading toward the basement. Marcus made a quick decision that would either save them all or destroy any chance of exposing the truth. "Detective Park," he said quietly, "I need to show you something. That's going to seem impossible at first, but I have evidence of a 70-year-old art rescue operation and documentation of the criminals trying to steal from it." Park studied Marcus's face, clearly trying to assess his credibility. "Show me." Marcus led him to the hidden panel, his heart pounding. Everything depended on the next few minutes: Selena's safety, Vincent's legacy, and the chance to finally bring justice to a fight that had been going on for decades. As footsteps approached from above, Marcus opened the secret door and gestured toward the passage beyond. "Detective," he said, "welcome to the Vincent Blackwood collection."